My own background, you may know, is in pensions and finance. And I've worked on all sorts of aspects, championing different groups and fighting for social justice and trying to help ordinary people navigate around finance and other types of issues. And that's why I'm really honored to be working with Paperweight, which is basically the Jewish community's Citizens Advice Bureau. And to help with our session this evening, we've got Benjamin Conway, the chair and founder, who's also trustee, followed by Bela Perrin, who is the CEO of Paperweight and another founder trustee. They have worked their socks off to produce what is an amazing service for our community. I think we can all be really proud of what they've been doing. And I know that they have never been busier than they are now. And they have been helping so many people, and they really care about how to help best for those in our community who are struggling or just not quite understanding what is always going on. So if I can ask them to give a short background to the work of the Paperweight charity and set the context for today. Over to you, Benji.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Ros. Thank you to all our panelists, and a very warm welcome to everyone joining us. Paperweight are delighted to host this webinar, and it affords us the opportunity to air some of the important matters that are facing us during these difficult times, and also to highlight some of the issues that Paperweight address. To put in context, founded in 2010, Paperweight has demonstrated remarkable success, filling a void in the care system and rapidly becoming the Jewish community's Citizens Advice Bureau, guiding over 2,500 people since inception, right across the entire communal spectrum. We average over 80 new clients every month, from 20-year-olds to 95-year-olds, with a wide range of need, circumstances, and ability. We live in challenging times, and this is not only due to the coronavirus. Personal debt has soared, dependency on welfare benefits has increased, we are witnessing a significant increase in separation and divorce, and whilst life expectancy has increased, we do so, unfortunately, not in the best of health at all times. Many people do not have the wherewithal to access professional advice, and at best of times, we can all struggle with the demands of administrative tasks and bureaucracy that are part and parcel of our everyday lives. For those who are alone, vulnerable, or in crisis of one sort or another, these issues can be a daunting mountain to climb. Our Paperweight volunteers, some of whom are logged in this evening, are trained with knowledge and expertise and are willing and able to step in, advocate and guide, thereby not only resolving the problem, but also alleviating stress, anxiety, reducing the pressure on other agencies and saving precious finances. As we've all witnessed, in the most dramatic fashion, COVID-19 has served to heighten the effects of these issues on those already in need, and also to impact on many who were previously independent and self-sufficient, but now face furlough, redundancy, loss of savings, and other life-changing scenarios, and in addition resulting in a significant increase in the call for our services. Evidence suggests that at present, we are in the early stages of the fallout. And as the true picture emerges over the next few months, we may well witness greater need for large numbers of our community. Our expert panelists will focus on the practical side of welfare, legal and financial matters. I now hand back to you, Ros.
Thank you so much, Benji. And Bela, if you wouldn't mind saying a few words of introduction as well before we turn to our three experts.
Of course. Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us. Paperweight is a different kind of social care organisation. It was designed to help those in the community who have reached a crisis point and who don't have the experience and the knowledge and even the energy to tackle the problems that they're facing. We at Paperweight adopt a holistic approach to our clients' problems, and we help them wherever possible, actively and hands-on. And in non-COVID times, we go to meet the clients in their own home where possible, where they feel safe and where they feel confident. We will appoint a caseworker who works together with the client, who will advocate and guide through a maze of paperwork and bureaucracy. The caseworkers that are part of Paperweight come from all walks of life, and many of them are active or retired professionals in the legal, accounting, or public service fields. Paperweight's primary service is free for everybody. In many crisis areas, we have substantial experience, whether it's housing issues and homelessness, which is a common cause of huge distress. We will attend court as Mackenzie Friend in civil law matters, and we have our own in-house family law support and advocacy unit, which sadly is kept very busy. We tackle service suppliers where they're being unfair and unreasonable, and we are able to assist with mandatory reconsiderations and appeals against low PIP ratings, and we have a team of benefits experts who can assist to make strong cases for boosts in grants and disability awards. We help the elderly and the young, the mentally acute, and those who are suffering from mental ill health. We understand survivors' needs, and we are equally aware of young adults' issues as well. We can help with lasting power of attorney applications, probate matters, and assisting those who are sadly newly bereaved, or not so newly bereaved. We have a very broad spread of in-house expertise, and we work confidently hand in hand with local authorities, all the community social care providers across their own specialisms, and we have an excellent relationship with all of those with whom we collaborate, with a view to finding lasting solutions to life's crisis. Thank you, and hope you enjoy the evening.
Thank you so much, Bela and Benji. And now we turn to the real business for the evening for all of you out there who are watching. And I'd like to introduce you to our three experts, Caroline Kahan, Daniel Baum, and Rachel Jaysan. And each one is going to give you a few minutes to describe what their experience has been of the current pandemic and what help is available to you and how they have managed to help, or how they understand the opportunities that might be available for all of you. So if I can ask Caroline first, to introduce Caroline for a second. She's our first expert. She's the former CEO of both Barnet and Hemel Hempstead Citizens Advice Bureau, and she now volunteers for the Citizens Advice as well. And she will share her expertise and give you really helpful information on the eligibility for benefits, employment help, and also the consequences of the current crisis on these and how you can best make use of what is available from the government. So over to you, Caroline, please.
Thank you, Ros. I want to begin by thanking Paperweight for inviting me to speak this evening, and to thank them as well for holding this webinar, which I hope will be very useful to all participants. I've worked for local citizens advice bureaus for 20 years in a variety of roles, including as an advisor, an advice supervisor, senior manager and CEO, and I'm now going back to my roots doing more advice. This evening, I'm going to give you some information primarily about the coronavirus job retention scheme for employees, the coronavirus income support scheme for the self-employed, and benefits with specific reference to the current situation. Please be aware that the new government measures were all put together very quickly, so the guidance is frequently changing. and to ensure that you have the most up-to-date information, it's always worth referring to .gov.uk, which is constantly kept up to date throughout. So moving on to the scheme itself, it forms part of a collective set of measures that have been put in place by the government to protect people's jobs. It began on the 1st of March and it currently runs until the 30th of June, subject to further extension. It's designed to help employers whose operations have been severely disrupted by coronavirus to retain their employees and protect both the employees and the general economy. All employers are able to participate in the scheme and can opt in at any point during its duration, provided that the furlough period is for 3 weeks or more. The prerequisites are that the employer must have created and started a PAYE payroll scheme on or before the 19th of March 2020, enrolled for PAYE online, and have a UK bank account. The specifics are, if you can't maintain your current workforce because your operations have been impacted, you can furlough employees and apply to HMRC to cover 80% of employees' normal gross pay up to a maximum of £2,500 a month, plus associated employer NI and pension contributions up to 3%. Eligible employees are those on the payroll by the 19th of March 2020, where real-time payroll information has been submitted to the revenue by the 19th of March 2020. Regular wages include any contractual pay, regular contractual pay, any commission, but not discretionary pay or any discretionary bonuses. Employers can top up furlough pay, but they are not obliged to do so. If an employee was in employment on the 28th of February 2020, but then either left or was dismissed, the employer can re-employ him or her and furlough that person. It would be, though, up to the discretion of the former employer. Before introducing the scheme, employers should consult with their employees and set out in writing to the employees the terms and conditions of the furlough. If the employee agrees or at any rate fails to object, then the variation to their original contractual terms and pay will be lawful. The employee still pays tax, NI and employee pension contributions on their furloughed wages. The employer should pay employees on the same date of the month as usual to avoid any potential issues with universal credit payments, which some may be claiming as a top-up. Employees can refuse to be furloughed, but if they do, it may be that their only alternative is facing redundancy. And again, that will very much depend on the liquidity of the employer, but that seems to be the most likely outcome. The normal contractual rights apply during furlough, so employees will accrue statutory or contractual holiday entitlement. With the requisite notice, employers can ask employees to take some of their annual leave during furlough. As I said before, the minimum furlough period is 3 weeks, and employers can rotate groups of employees so that some are on furlough while some are working. While on furlough, employees cannot be asked to do any work at all for their employer, but they can attend training and they can be asked to attend training. If their contract allows, they can take on work for a different unconnected employer as long as they return to their job at the end of the furlough period. So with regard to sickness and furlough, an employee can't get both SSP and furlough pay at the same time. So if they fall sick during the furlough period, it will be up to the employer to decide which to pay. However, if a furloughed employer who becomes sick is moved onto SSP, their employer can no longer claim for the furloughed salary. Right, so that's the nuts and bolts of the scheme. It's quite detailed.
Thank you very much, Caroline.
Shall I move on to the next part? I'm not quite sure how long you'd like me to speak with. Shall I just touch very briefly on the other?
Very briefly, because we need to move to the others and then we'll come back to questions shortly.
Okay, so in terms of the coronavirus income support scheme, essentially it is the similar scheme to the coronavirus job retention scheme, but it's for self-employed people. You must be self-employed with profits of less than £50,000 a year, and they will look at your last 3 tax returns for the last 3 tax years. I'm happy to leave the benefit stuff, whatever, if time is running short.
Yeah, I think if we can move on, get everybody introduced, and then we'll come back to
Sure.
specific questions.
Exactly.
And we have got questions that have already been sent in to us when we invited people to this webinar. But if we have time, we'd be happy to take questions from anyone else in the audience tonight. So if you would like to submit questions, if we can get round to them, then we will happily answer them. And if you still want to ask something, you can always contact Paperweight after this evening's session as well, and I'll give you some information on that later. But if I can now ask our next expert, Daniel Baum, to give us a little bit of information about his area of expertise. He's an accountant, founding partner of Cameron Baum Hollander, and he will reflect on what help is on offer during the pandemic, as well as information on tax matters and the business interruption loans. So Daniel, if you could give us a few minutes introduction to what's happening on those areas, please.
Yes, certainly. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to Benji, Baylor and Ros for inviting me onto the panel. I have in my office a hand-wound antique calendar, and it has a date and a day and a month. And every morning when I go in, I take a little bit of pleasure in winding forwards the date of the next day. That calendar is currently showing Monday, the 23rd of March, and that date hasn't moved for 6 weeks. Life as we knew it, and from my viewpoint, business as we knew it, may have changed forever from that date when lockdown was imposed. As Ros mentioned, I'm a chartered accountant, and since the 23rd of March, none of our staff have attended the office, no clients have been to our office, and there's a note on the door saying we're closed due to the coronavirus. We had already set up remote working, and nearly all of our workers, bar one, are working remotely. We've been helping our clients manage the situation by helping them prepare profit and loss and cash flow projections, preparing and submitting on their behalf dozens of furlough claims, which Caroline just explained, updating our website for helpful tips and hints, and assisting them apply for business loans. But the tsunami, and I think that's not too strong a term, of economic chaos, not to mention the personal health risks from the virus, has been for many businesses completely overwhelming. And no matter what plans are in place, it's been necessary to adapt to a new reality. And for many, if not most, to continue my analogy, to cling to the life rafts that the government has thrown out to help businesses survive. And I'm just going to run through, just a very few quick minutes, what some of those life rafts are. The furlough scheme, I won't review again. Caroline went into it in great detail, but the vast majority of our clients have furloughed the vast majority of their employees. And I think that pattern has been reflected throughout the country. I would say, ironically, it's the higher earners who seem to suffer the most, because if your salary is over £30,000, you may have taken a very dramatic cut in earnings because it's capped at £2,500 a month. What about the self-employed? Well, it's a very mixed story here. If your average profits over the last 3 years exceed £50,000, you get nothing, nothing at all. If they're below £50,000, you can get up to £7,500. And there's a calculation there to be done. But 7.5 is the maximum you will get, and you will get that in one lump sum covering the 3 months, March, April, May, and June. There are 2 types of government-backed business loans, which Ros said I'd refer to, and they are the Corona Business Interruption Loan, the CBIL, and the Bounce Back. The Bounce Back, catchy name, only launched this week on Monday. According to today's newspaper, there have already been 200,000 applications and £1 billion has been lent. The Bounce Back loan is a simple to apply for online form. You can borrow up to £50,000, any business, company, sole trader, but it can't be more than a quarter of your turnover. So if your turnover is 100,000, you can only borrow 25, a maximum of £50,000. It's 100% backed by the government. There is a misnomer that, oh, that's okay because the government will pay it if I don't, but that's not true. You will pay it, it is your loan, but the government will settle it with the banks if you can't pay it. And that's important. The other loan, the Corona Business Loan, is for much larger amounts, up to £5 million. But the banks are being very difficult about this. We have managed to get it for a few of our clients, but this requires projections, cash flows, and a lot more information to satisfy the banks. There are other reliefs, which I'll just skip through. There's rates relief if you are lucky enough to, well, lucky enough is probably the wrong term, but if you have a rateable value between £15,000 and £50,000, then you will pay no rates for a year on your business if you're retail or leisure, and you will get an automatic £25,000 grant. And a few of our clients have actually received this, so I know it works. If you pay VAT, you haven't had to pay any VAT in the last quarter, but that's only being deferred until next year. And if you pay income tax and you're self-employed, you know that you pay in January and July each year. The July payment, again, is deferred until next January. So they're giving you a break, but they're not letting you off the hook. In these troubled times, the health of the individual had to come first, but in locking down almost all businesses, the damage to the economy is severe, and the government debt will be gargantuan, and the depth of the forthcoming recession is as yet unknown. Some businesses are adapting, they're going online, they're changing what they offer, and some with great success. But for others, it's a very difficult road ahead, and we're here to help them. I tell all my clients, whatever else you forget, turnover is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash is king. Thank you.
Very nice. Thank you very much, Daniel. And last but not least, our other third expert, Rachel Jaysan, who is a solicitor and mediator. She's a consultant for London Family Solicitor, and she also runs her own mediation practice. She looks for alternatives when trying to expedite divorce or court procedures, and also tries to get a clearer understanding of the range of options available to resolve conflict. Now her focus is on how the coronavirus has affected the protocols of family law. And of course, there are many families who are going through difficult times, and this virus has just added to their problems and stress. So if you could just give us a little introduction to what you've been doing and what is available for people during the current crisis. Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you, Ros, and thanks Daniel and Caroline for what you just both said. It was really informative. And again, thank you to Paperweight for inviting me to speak and hosting this webinar. So as you just said, Ros, I am an accredited mediator and I'm also a solicitor and I consult for a firm in the city. And I'm going to be talking to you about the impact of COVID-19 on the courts. So on the 19th of March, the Lord Chief Justice issued a statement, and in an unprecedented move, he said that the default position must be that all court hearings have to be conducted remotely. And in saying that, he recognised that this is not going to be a short-lived position, and that's would be something that's going to have to continue for many, many months. Since the outbreak of Corona, the courts have had to change their ways overnight in which they work and operate. All hearings have been facilitated by video link or by telephone, and in most cases they've done so without the technological infrastructure to support this. And this has led to many logistical difficulties, with parties finding it difficult to access hearings. Only last week, the president of the Family Division confirmed that the courts are running at only 40 to 50% capacity. And of that, they're only hearing really simple matters. So any longer or in-depth hearings are generally just being adjourned. And sometimes they're being adjourned indefinitely. Even once the courts begin to reopen, given the staged withdrawal of the lockdown measures we've been told we can expect, and the continued necessity for social distancing, which honestly many courtrooms cannot accommodate, the courts are not going to be operating at full capacity for many, many months, and the backlog, which is being built up and will continue to do so over this time, is going to be considerable. And again, it's going to be a very long time until the courts are hearing cases at the same rate as they were prior to March 2020. 2020 is not going to be an option for all but the most serious and urgent of matters, and families in dispute are just going to have to find alternative ways of resolving their difficulties. And the current consensus within the family law profession is that the landscape will change within family law, and this is going to be an everlasting change. So in terms of looking at the alternatives for going to court, because as I say, most families are going to have to look at alternatives. Most families who would previously not have necessarily considered these alternatives to be realistic in their situation are just going to have to be forced to do so. And the two main alternatives are arbitration and mediation. So I'm just going to spend a minute or two just sort of highlighting what those alternative options are, just to give you all a little bit more information. So arbitration is a private alternative to the public court system. I often sort of use the analogy to clients as arbitration as being sort of the private medical health sector, and the court system being the NHS equivalent. So arbitration uses an independent arbitrator who effectively takes the place of the judge, and he or she will make decisions and determinations akin to those made by a judge. They come binding on the court. And the process does require the both parties to consent, and it deals with matters much more swiftly and often more cheaply. And arbitration can also be used to address both family and children issues, and the scope actually in which the issues that it can address within children matters has recently, in the last couple of weeks, been expanded. And then again, mediation is another alternative, and something again that parties who potentially may not have considered this previously are going to have to do so. And often couples, who decide to separate or divorce, they go straight to solicitors. They often cease all direct communication, which causes the temperature to steadily rise between the two of them. Mediation allows the parties to speak to each other directly. It removes the miscommunication that often arises when parties instruct solicitors and engage in hostile correspondence. And the mediator's job is to facilitate discussion and provide information and options to help the parties reach agreements.
Thanks very much,
And parties
Rachel.
are forced
Thank
to
you.
focus on the okay.
The quality is not great, Rachel. You keep disappearing. Forgive me. I don't know if you want to try just summing up for a second, or shall we move on to questions?
Did you hear about arbitration, or did you not hear? What did you hear?
I heard some, but it flashed a little bit on and off. So,
okay.
Shall we move on to questions, because time is short, I think.
We'll come back, Rachel.
Yeah, fine.
And we'll come back, yes?
Yeah.
Thank you. And don't forget, if you want to ask any questions, all of you who are watching us out there, please send them in and we'll try and get round to your questions. Thank you so much to all of our 3 experts. I think we've got a really interesting explanation of some of the things that are available. And I know what I want to make clear is nobody here is able to give anybody individual advice. This is all guidance and information. So it is designed to help you rather than look at all your circumstances, which we can't possibly know, and just give you some pointers as to what is available to you. And you're welcome to follow up with Paperweight afterwards as well. Maybe if I start with a question that has been sent in for Daniel, but actually I think if Caroline or Rachel want to add anything as well. My wife and I each run a small business from home. We each make our own tax returns and have net profits of about £10,000 a year. We've not been earning anything during the lockdown. Please, could you tell us what help we can get from the government? We're not very keen on taking out loans.
Would you like me to deal with that?
Daniel, if you wouldn't mind starting.
Yeah, sure. So here you've got a case of 2 self-employed people. In the UK, they're independent, so they can each make a claim. Their profits appear to be below the £50,000 barrier, so they are entitled to make a claim. The way it's calculated is they look at the average profit, 10. They take 3 months of that, a quarter of that, £2,500. Multiply by 80%, you end up with £2,000. They will each get £2,000 from HMRC straight into their bank account. And although I haven't yet had a client who's actually had the money, it is supposed to come directly from HMRC without asking for it. They are scouring through people's tax returns, and the idea is that they will calculate it and send the money.
Thank you.
That's the long and short of it.
Thank you. And can I just ask, if you are delaying the tax payments, if you're not paying your rates, or if you're not paying your VAT right now, you're deferring your self-employed, is there interest on that when you do finally pay it?
No.
That's an interest-free delay.
Interest-free. But there's a nasty shock, obviously, coming down the line when these things come to be paid. And I suspect that the vast majority of people will struggle when that time comes, and hopefully the government will come up with something else to help spread those payments. I suspect that's what will happen.
Thank you. And Caroline, if I ask you a question, and then if you want to add anything to the previous one as well. This is a question: are newly submitted applications for the PIP, the Personal Independence Payment, being decided currently on the basis of written evidence alone? Usually you'd have a medical assessment in person.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding is that if you've made a claim for a personal independence payment and you haven't been given an assessment date, you do not need to do anything further at the moment. They will contact you in due course. At the moment, there are no face-to-face medical assessments taking place. So I would have thought that unless you are terminally ill and have submitted a DS 1500, then I suspect it would be a question of waiting and biding time.
Thank you.
In terms of the second part of the question, there was a second part. Do you want me to answer that as well?
Yeah,
well, basically, it was if someone is currently claiming universal credit and has just been awarded a PIT, is it advisable or possible in principle to apply for ESA and housing benefit? And the answer to that categorically is no. Once in receipt of universal credit, always stay on universal credit.
Yeah, the government really wants to encourage people to use universal credit. Rachel, if I can turn to you, and hopefully the sound quality will be okay. And I wondered if you could just tell us how mediation can help parents make arrangements for contact under the new circumstances, how legal aid might be available for people on low incomes so that they don't have to wait for the courts.
Yeah, sure. So mediation is one of the alternatives that people, as I said before, well, I got cut off, so I don't think you heard me, but again, is going to be something that parties are absolutely going to have to explore as the first option. So as I say, it allows parties to sit together. I don't know if I've cut off. I seem to have paused. Have I cut off?
Pauses, but keep going, keep trying.
Okay, fine, sorry.
I'm sorry, everybody out there. The wonders of modern technology.
So mediation basically allows for the facilitation of discussion between the parties. When it comes to children matters, it also allows for children to be brought into the process as well. So it gives the children a voice to be able to give their wishes and feelings to the mediation in a private and confidential setting away from the parents. So although children aren't given any decision-making power, it does allow the parents the opportunity to hear their children's concerns and their hopes for the future. And that often then shapes the framework of the arrangements. And then just very briefly in terms of legal aid, yeah, legal aid is something that is available for mediation. So lots of people think that legal aid isn't available for family law really at all, unless, you know, there's sort of, very sort of limited circumstances. But actually, when it comes to family law, it's just a simple means test, and lots of families are eligible for that. And I'm not going to go into sort of all the details about that now, but I'm happy to provide that information to Paperweight if necessary. But if you are eligible for legal aid mediation, then you also get free solicitor's advice as well to accompany that mediation, and free legal help to draft up any agreements that are associated with the mediation. So that's always really helpful to know.
Okay, a couple of quick questions for Daniel. Is there any support for people who are sole directors and sole employees of small companies? Technically, they're not self-employed, and also the £25,000 loan for rate or fixed amount for rate relief, is it graduated in some way, and when would it be repayable?
No, well, taking the second part first, the rates grant is not graduated. If your rateable value of your office is between 15 and 50, you will get a £25,000 transfer into your bank account. But I must point out that's for retail and leisure only. It's not for people who have an office. That's the first thing. The second thing is a very common problem. Companies where there's one director who's the only employee, or husband and wife who are and directors and employees, and they take out a very small salary and a very large dividend. Very common. There is no help. They are not self-employed. The dividend doesn't apply, that can't be furloughed, and only the salary can be furloughed. And even then, it's not easy for a director to be furloughed, because you're not allowed to do anything, which Caroline pointed out, whilst you're on furlough. And the minute you start acting in any way for the business, you're breaking the rules of the furlough. So very, very difficult indeed for owner-manager, one-man band companies to get much help at all.
Thank you. And Caroline, we've got some questions about furlough again. can an employer make someone redundant straight after they've finished the furlough?
Whether or not they can make you redundant straight after you've finished the furlough will depend on the necessary consultation period, how long you've been employed as well, because obviously if you haven't been employed for 2 years, you have very few rights. But nonetheless, a good employer should always consult, and there will be different rules as to how long the consultation period is, depending on the number of employees involved. It's good practice to tell them the reasons and give them the opportunity to offer some suggestions as to how it might be avoided, to offer suitable alternative employment, to allow them time off to look for other work, etc., etc. And then if it turns out that redundancy is what you have to do, then you obviously have to give them the requisite notice, which will depend upon their contract, or if it's statutory, upon how long they've worked for the employer.
Okay, I'm conscious of the time, and I have been told that we can run on for about an extra 10 minutes. So if you're out there and you're happy to stay, please stay with us. And I'm trying to get round to some of the questions that you've sent in, as well as the ones that we already had beforehand. So one that's come in, and it's a theme that's quite common, I think. It's on furlough again, actually, Caroline. If an employer restarts an ex-employee who they've previously dismissed in order to help them claim furlough, does that employer then have to re-employ them after the furlough is over? Do you know?
Well, they would, by dint of the fact that they are on the payroll again, because they have to be furloughed, they would have been re-employed. So presumably, unless the employer has a reason to dismiss them, they would remain as an employee until such time as any action is taken to dismiss them, and then there would have to be a proper procedure, etc. Yeah. I would imagine that they would have retained continuity of employment. It depends how long they've been off the payroll for. So I couldn't be too specific about that.
Okay, thank you. And Rachel, we've had some questions. This is one. We are in the middle of divorce proceedings and at the stage of negotiating a financial agreement. I'm very concerned about how COVID-19 will affect any settlement. My husband has been furloughed. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so there's obviously quite a lot of things to consider if you're in the middle of sort of financial negotiations, but from a practical perspective, it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, to get property valuations, especially if the property is being lived in. Obviously, the property market has come to more or less of a halt, and the impact of the housing markets going forwards is unknown. So these are all things that need to be taken into consideration. Again, pensions, if pension valuations have yet to be obtained, then lots of pension companies are actually refusing to provide valuations at the moment. And again, it's going to be very difficult to sort of get that information, and then, you know, again, the impact of COVID on the pension scheme itself. So and as well as that, you know, if the husband has been furloughed, then reaching an agreement based on his current income isn't going to be a sensible idea, and he's not going to want to reach an agreement based on his, you know, his normal income, as it were. So it might be that you just have to sort of consider putting things to a hold, holding things at the moment, and just sort of hanging fire until we've got a much better idea as to what's going to happen before anything's finalised. So I think that's probably the way forward. But obviously, every situation is different, and it's important that everyone gets, you know, legal advice in relation to their specific situation.
Yeah, I mean, this is another question that for you, and if Caroline has any comment as well. Rachel, my ex has stopped paying me child maintenance. I'm not sure what to do. Okay. What would you say?
Well, again, it's very difficult to get in contact with child maintenance service. It's a nightmare to get hold of them. So again, back to my original position, is that if you can try and, you know, enter into some kind of constructive negotiation discussion with him and open those, or her, and open those lines of communication. That's the first thing that has to be done. I mean, technically, child maintenance has to continue to be paid. Even if someone's furloughed, then there's a reduction of 20% of income. Technically, the child maintenance service won't review mid-year an assessment unless there's a change of 25%. So if someone's income's reduced by 20%, they still have to continue paying the child maintenance effectively. Whether they do or not is a different story. But again, it's just sort of having, you know, the ability to enforce those arrears. And the reality is that even once the arrears, you know, there are enforcement proceedings at some point in the future. If the reduction was made because someone was in significant financial difficulty, then it's quite likely that the courts will just remove those arrears in their entirety. So, as I say, what people need to be doing is trying to open those lines of communication and try and think of alternatives, and maybe look at, you know, agreeing reductions, rather than one party just stopping maintenance in its entirety. It's a very difficult situation to be in.
Okay, and Caroline, a quick question, either for you and or Daniel. Can a furloughed worker take another job? I know they can't work for the current employer, but can they take another job?
If their contract allows them to do so, then yes, they can take a job for an employer who is not connected in any way with their employer, with their current employer. But they would need to be ready to return when their furlough period ends. So it would need to be, you know, depending on how long they're furloughed for, it could be.
Okay. And Daniel, we've had a question come in from one of our lovely listeners, as it were. Is there any financial assistance for dental surgeries? The self-employed is a big issue, so
yes,
you could answer that.
So dentists are in a very sort of unenviable position, because if they have an NHS practice, first of all, dentists can't practice at all, and there doesn't seem to be an end to it. So people who are usually sort of fairly healthy earners have suddenly gone to zero, and not many dentists are earning less than, or not long-standing, they're earning less than 50. So on the self-employed help, there's no help. If you're an NHS practice, there are special rules, and the NHS is continuing to pay a percentage of what they normally pay out. It's very specific, but NHS practices do have some help. Private practice there's not much there. You might have the rates rebate if you have a shop. You might try for the bounce back loan, but that's not a grant, it's a loan. But it's difficult, very difficult.
Another question, quick question from our audience. Can someone whose cafe has now closed still apply for a business loan?
Okay. I've had all sorts of questions from clients about these business loans. People have come up with all sorts of clever ideas. And there are two conditions to the business loan. Number one, your business had to have been a going concern during 2019. So if you were an establishment that was already in serious trouble before the virus started, you can't apply for the loan. And if you do, because it's self-certification, then you may find later down the line you're in serious trouble. The second thing is the loan has to be to help you get through the coronavirus period. And if that's not the case, again, you're getting your loan under false pretenses.
Sounds like that might be a bit of a dodgy thing to do.
Yes, I've had a few dodgy questions in the last few weeks. The answer is usually no.
Okay, good. Once again, we are almost out of time. One final question, Rachel. My children have told me on a number of occasions that my ex is regularly taking them to other people's houses for play dates and meals. And I'm really concerned about both mine and the children's safety, particularly as I have severe asthma. Is there anything that she can do?
Well, yeah, again, back to my sort of original position and trying to sort of open those channels of communication and see if they can, you know, if she can speak to her ex and you know, get him to agree for him not to flout the lockdown measures. But you know, if he just refuses to do so, then she has to consider taking him to court. Well, she has to consider stopping contact in its entirety if she feels that there's a significant risk of harm to the children, and at the same time making an application to the court to sort of endorse this step. So yes, there are things they can do, and the courts are hearing urgent applications where there are significant risks of harm to children, and I've had a number of cases where exactly that situation has happened in the recent few weeks.
Thank you. And just one final quick question for Caroline, which I think might be important. If I become sick while I'm on furlough, do I get statutory sick pay or furlough pay?
That will be up to your employer.
Okay.
You can be given statutory sick pay, but your employer may well choose to keep you on furlough.
Okay, well, thank you to all of our fantastic experts. I mean, I think we could have gone on for another half an hour at least, but we have to call a halt now. We hope that you found this useful, and Paperweight is here to support you and to take the burden off you. If you, especially through this crisis, and you're feeling overwhelmed, do turn to Paperweight for some help. And obviously we couldn't address all the questions tonight, but please do call the Paperweight office and they will assign someone to help you. The details should be coming up on your screens shortly. And if you have enjoyed this evening, please, we would love it if you'd be happy to make a donation to help support the amazing work of our Paperweight volunteers. And I'd also like to just thank all of you involved in Paperweight. I'd like, obviously, to thank Benji, Baylor, and particularly for this evening to thank Caroline Kahan, Rachel Jaysan, and Daniel Baum for their excellent answers to the questions and explanations of what's happening. And I'd like to now wish each and every one of you good health and hope that you enjoy the rest of the evening. And just remember that Paperweight is here to help if you need them. Thank you very much, everybody, and goodbye.